serendipity is great and it's lovely to bump into people randomly. But actually, if you're an event organizer, relying on serendipity is you're short selling your audience. So the whole thing is designed so that people are in the right spaces at the right time, meeting the right people, whether that's through something really obvious like the Connect program that puts startups in front of like senior leaders from payers and providers and government and pharma, or it's through knowing that these people are going to be at these sessions in this area, so this should be here and that should be positioned there.
Welcome to today's episode of The Power Shift. And actually, we're talking about a topic that surprisingly haven't really talked about that much, but we tend to have done quite a lot of Medic Footprints, which is curating rooms, bringing people together and making magic happen. Right. And as one of the things we always recommend, especially if you are building your own career, is the big N word that people are really bored of these days, networking. And what does that mean? Actually getting into a room and like developing relationships, starting new relationships and developing them. And it really is an incredible skill to be able to do that well, especially if you are building your own community and audience, right? And so talking about audiences, who we got to join us in this conversation about curating these rooms, we've got Henry Stoneley, who is the head of audience for Health, HLTH. So if you haven't heard of Health, it is an incredible, I don't even want to call it conference. It's like an immersive experience where they're bringing some of the best, the brightest and the craziest disruptive people in health across the world together to have fun and talk and unicorns. Would you say that's right? Yes, yes.
It's a really it's a good start of a summary.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
well, welcome, Henry. Anyway,
lovely to be here. Yeah, it's a very good start. It's there are unicorns. We have a 6'2" unicorn called Petunia, but it's really, and again, it's not a conference. It's more of an event, a show, and it is a meeting of the biggest names, minds, ideas in all of European healthcare and US healthcare.
I love that. I love that. And you need unicorns for that, really. You do. I mean, like my 3-year-old just had her birthday and she wanted a unicorn cake. She didn't get a unicorn cake, by the way, but unicorns seem to be a thing that came out in the 80s and then again now. And these two generations just identify with it. So just throw it in there. Right. That's how it's remembered, right?
Absolutely. And I I placed it very gently as a costume into 2 bags so I can fly it out to Las Vegas.
Oh my God.
Which is always there's the fear when you have a unicorn in 2 bags that you're going to put it in the bottom of your big head flight, and then you're going to get to Las Vegas with just the head, just the body. Neither be a good look. So yeah, it is. Petunia is packed and ready to go.
Awesome. I didn't even know that it had a name, but there you go. Named Unicorn Petunia.
There's a whole back, genuinely, like pre-Gen AI, there's a back law. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's move on from the ramble. Like, people are like, when are you going to get to the fucking content? Here we are. We're getting to the content now, but that was the content, by the way. This is all about curating and like introducing you to what's about to happen. So let's start talking about rooms. Yes. So as we've eloquently described, it is about when you're bringing people together, it is about curating, creating, moderating, whatever you want to call it, rooms or experiences that bring, A, these people actually want to come to it, and B, they want to actually do some really cool stuff at it. So based on your experience, obviously running health for some years now, like what would you say actually makes that room transformational in that sense? Like where real innovation, it actually happens, even in the conversations that people can take away with them and actually make happen outside of those rooms.
So I think there are 3 things to this. So the first one is our audience is about 35% C-suite across, and it's a pan healthcare event. So about 35% of the people in the room are CCIOs, CEOs, CTOs, presidents, that kind of thing. And you need to have a really, really senior room. We could make Health Europe 10 times larger and have absolutely everybody in the room, and it would be, I think I'd probably have some form of cardiac event if we did that, just in terms of numbers. But that's not what we're going for. What we want to do is get the most senior people, the people who can most rapidly influence change and
The
create.
decision makers, right? The change makers, the people that actually can make it happen.
Exactly. And then the sort of stars of the future leaders, the people who are going to be in those positions in a couple of years' time. So you get all of those people in one room, and then you have to get them to talk. And there are really the other two bits are how you get them to talk. So one is we build our content really differently. So most events do pay to play. You give them 10,000 of any a currency, and they put you on the main stage. And we don't let anyone on our track or main stage pay to play. So it's all curated. People apply to speak, we go out to people, we're introduced to people. But the joy of that is it means we can talk about whatever we want. So what happens over the summer is Lena, who's our head of content and strategy, and I and other members of the team will speak to everyone from health ministers to patients, all the way through the kind of cycle, about one thing, which is what keeps them up at night. What's the thing when you go home to your partner and you come in the door and you're like, and they go like, what's wrong? It's the thing that you say then, the thing that people maybe hold back sometimes, that most important discussions to have. So we get all of these incredible senior leaders, and then we get them to talk about things that matter, because we're not confined by sort of having to do what a sponsor wants. You can get people to have very open, frank conversations.
Yeah, just out of interest, just jumping on that, what does keep people up at night? Because at the end of the day, we're all human, right? So is it usually the first answer to that question is to do with work, or is it actually it's my cat and their illness, or it's like my teenage daughter and her GCSEs? Like I'd love to hear like what actually comes out.
The interesting is that all of those things tie into each other, right? So if it's your cat and their illness, or your daughter's GCSEs, right? That you're not worried necessarily about what happens, you know, in September or whenever the results come out. Worried about the mental health of your daughter and the stress and the anxiety, and they're like what they're not telling you, and the projection of what their future will look like, and all of those things play into it. So I think because of the framing of those conversations, as in I work for Health Europe, we're talking about Health Europe, they tend to focus on the healthcare pieces, what keeps them up from a work perspective. But I think it's the answers are so different, because we speak to, over the last few years, we've spoken to hundreds of people about this. The answers are really varied. So it can be personal things. It can be, I'm struggling with a diagnosis, or I feel like, particularly for people who work in the healthcare space, who are then diagnosed with something, they might feel like, I don't feel as empowered as I thought I would. I don't feel as knowledgeable as I feel I should. Other people have much broader societal worries about AI and about public health and things like that. And we take all of these conversations and we put them into one document, which Lena and I understand it, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Put it into one document, and then we try and work out what the trends are in all of these conversations, and we distill that down into sort of 10 things that we release as themes that we released this week. I think we're releasing this week. And then we build the content off that. But those are the first two ways we curate that room. The third one, lots of events will rely on, they'll refer to it as like serendipity, or your attendees refer to it as serendipity. I bumped into this person, in the same way we were discussing before we started recording about you bumping into various different investors and senior leaders in Europe.
And Daniel Priestley.
Daniel Priestley and
Stephen Bartlett.
He's actually on the wall behind me with it. So
wow.
Not actually, I mean, a picture.
Yeah, I was going to say, he gets around. He does get around though, he does.
He does, yeah. So serendipity is great, and it's lovely to bump into people randomly, but actually, if you're an event organizer, relying on serendipities, you're short selling your audience. So the whole thing is designed so that people are in the right spaces at the right time, meeting the right people, whether that's through something really obvious like the Connect program that puts startups in front of like senior leaders from payers and providers and government and pharma, or it's through knowing that these people are going to be at these sessions in this area, so this should be here and that should be positioned there. The team who do the sort of logistics side of Health Europe have been working in event logistics for years and years, and they just know how to curate physical spaces, because we're talking mainly about the curation of a network, of a group, of an audience. And the best way of doing that is having the best physical space. And then all evenings apart from one, we have evening events. And that's when basically chaos reigns. We have no way of controlling who goes into which bits of those evening events and what time they arrive and how they interact. So you do very strong content with the best speakers in the world. You then make sure that the show floor and every activation you have sort of not forces, but gently guides people into the places where the people they want to meet are. And in the evenings, you just open the floodgates and go, right, you're all in the same space. And you find these incredible conversations happening. And you're just like, my job on site a lot of the time in those evening events is just sort of nip around, make sure everyone's okay. And you'll just overhear conversations that wouldn't happen anywhere else. You'll hear the leader of a giant Swiss pharma organization talking to a pre-seed startup from Gibraltar or somewhere. And you're like, these aren't conversations that would happen naturally. And actually, that's where a lot of the connections in healthcare are missed. That's where a lot of the silos happen. So we're breaking those down in the best possible way.
Yeah, I mean that absolutely, it makes a lot of sense. And we're seeing the trends in, I guess, this generational. I'm seeing a generational shift in events when I say people our age in our 30s and 40s are curating events that we probably enjoyed in childhood, and but these always, like, they also like stoke, as you said, like the best levels of conversation where you're breaking down those silos and bringing people together at more I don't say relational, but like human connection level, because that's exactly where the magic happens. I remember when I ran my first conference about 10, 11 years ago. First conference, 500 people somehow. I'm not sure how, but it happened. And people, I always say, like, you've been to a great conference that we've run when someone's crying. And people were crying at that event of joy, tears of joy. And same thing of the event we ran a few weeks ago, tears. And that's really because I think of those issues that you're bringing it down to that human level, and people can actually be themselves and take off that whole kind of work armor, and that's how things happen. Like, and it's great to hear that you're able to create those two sorts of rooms where you've got the kind of, okay, this is what that's about, this, but then you kind of let the floodgates open, and then everyone lets their guard down and they just start hanging out. That we know, like, the best businesses, the best relationships start like in a cafe on a napkin, right? And that's for a reason. So I think that really absolutely makes sense.
That's why we have so many napkins on site.
Yeah.
But you're right.
Ideas and ideas.
Yeah, literally napkins and pens. That's the big thing.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's exactly those moments. And there's a lovely example from this year where a large innovation, I'm not going to name any names because it just feels a bit weird, but a large innovation organization from one of the largest European companies met on site via Market Connect, a company from 2 miles down the road who were very, very small, tiny company. I think 4 people who'd been trying to get a meeting with this organization for like 18 months, maybe 12 months, 18 months. They met on site. They now have a contract with them and they're running pilots and they're rolling out across the organization's sort of individual sites. And that wouldn't have happened without that, because last summer, I spent most of it talking to CCIOs, CIOs from across Europe and the US. And one of them, who's a UK CCIO, said, all right, we've got an hour, Henry. How many emails, cold emails, do you think I will get in this hour from health tech companies? And I was like, 1, maybe 2. Anyway, got to the end of it and there were 6. And so the volume of people trying to get to these decision makers is huge. And you're not going to get heard. And so I asked him, what do you do with them? He's like, I can't read them. Like, I cannot, because all of them will be things that I'm like, yes, that would absolutely transform how we work in this trust. That would be incredible. A, I don't have the budget. B, and my favorite quote from him ever, don't come to me with a problem I didn't know I have, which I thought was great, because they've only got so much capacity, both in terms of finance, but also in terms of headspace to solve problems. So there will be things they are looking to solve. And if it's just constant cold outreach, you're not going to make a dent. It's so rare for that to really work in healthcare. So yeah, we are hopefully solving that problem, putting the right people in the room and putting them together in a way that feels natural and less forced. And hey, I bumped into you in the coffee shop, or we were getting tacos and there you were. And it's much more human. And in an age of increasing sort of AI slop, human connection is so important. We're like, ultimately, the entire industry is set up to serve patients who are humans. And until we get to AI healthcare, where we've created healthcare to fix LLMs or something insane like that. It's always going to be about humans. So the connections at the very top of that conversation should also be human.
It will always be human, and I know that. But there are a few things that you brought up there, which I think is quite interesting and would be really useful for our audience. Um, the approach.
Mm.
So just that example you illustrated quite nicely. And one of the things we do when we are mentoring our doctors is like you go in not with the solution because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And people love a collaboration, but they don't want it as just someone to go in and like try and sell their stuff. And so as you said, like, that human connection actually just kind of removes all that and just makes it more a human thing. For example, I met someone at Ideas Fest. We were talking about Ideas Fest the other day. I'm not in partnership with Ideas Fest, but I'm just going to say it again, Ideas Fest. Ideas Fest. Look it up, guys. Yeah, I met someone who I most likely will partner with on a beanbag.
Yeah,
And it was
yeah,
only because someone pointed this person out to me because we were just mid-flow of a conversation that started as a result of me doing a bit of a semi-not pitch at another event. And they were like, "Oh, what are you looking for?" And I was like, "I'm looking for someone who amplifies what we do." And I was like, "Just speak to that guy on the beanbag with the hat." And I'm like, "Okay." Turns out to be a really cool guy. But it is. I mean, it's a mix of serendipity, but also clarity, but also like we don't go in with the answers and try and sell our stuff
absolutely.
initially. It is like get to that relationship level and go back to the question that you highlighted, as in like what keeps you up at night,
Yeah.
right?
Now, if you had a magic wand, what would you fix? Those are pretty much the two
Yeah.
questions that the whole agenda is built on. Like we we're really fortunate to be able to work with like all of the biggest names in healthcare. And the US event's been going for 8, 9 years and has huge brand, and that's helped us launch Europe and given us the ability to be in with these people. And now we are
Mm,
a known entity in our own right. But it's
yes.
human connections are so important. And I sold into the NHS for the best part of a decade, and I know how hard that is.
Getting harder.
Yeah, getting harder. Maybe I was in some kind of golden era.
You
Didn't
had
feel
the
like
golden years.
that.
Well, actually, that was
Absolutely.
easy. Those were the easy
Well, it's
years.
easy back then. Back when you just rang up the CEO and said, "I'm installing this." But I know how hard that is, and I think that
Mm,
the payoff from being at an event where you can just bump into that person, but also arrange a meeting with them in advance or track them down somewhere, find them, and have a conversation not about what you solve, but about their problems. And there are
yeah.
times when you might meet someone who you think is your sort of ICP, your ideal customer, right? And then you have a chat with them and you go, they're not looking to solve what I fix right now. And
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
as valuable,
Absolutely.
it's not as valuable, but it's almost as valuable as being able to sell to them because at least you're not going to then waste hours,
Exactly.
hours trying to get in touch with them. You've spoken to them and you go, all right, well, whatever it is, workforce management isn't a priority of theirs for the next 48 months. Maybe we arrange something in a few years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is again another reason why when our approach, especially with our doctors in industry, is don't go in looking for a job title. Go in really being clear on what problems do you want to solve, and then find other people who are also tackling that same problem that align with you. And it's that alignment, but also the chemistry element. It is like, actually, do you like them?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
literally dating. It literally is.
uh, yeah, there are two sort of really uncomfortable truths with healthcare sales, I think. One is that procurement processes are generally written for a pre-decided provider. I feel like
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
no one no
Absolutely.
one likes talking about it because when you win, great, amazing, look at the amazing work we did. Actually, all of that stuff's happened long before that tender came up. But no one likes talking about it, right? Unless you lose,
Yeah.
it's like, well, it's written for someone else.
Yeah.
And the second one is that, and I'm never a big fan of the sentence like people buy from people, because I think there's a lot more to it than that. But ultimately, it's about trust. And one of the best ways of building trust, well, one of the best ways is being super transparent and doing what you say you're going to do. And the second one is by having a connection with someone where they go, okay, I feel like this person gets my problem and can help me to solve that problem. But it's that first bit of understanding of getting the problem that starts to build that trust. So yeah, it's a very well curated room, and I think it will increase in terms of seniority this year. It will increase in terms of numbers, and that just means better and better conversations happen every year.
Absolutely. let's move on to the people in the room.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier that obviously decision makers, 35% C-suite, that's likely to increase. The overall numbers are going to be increased. One of the biggest challenges that I see at the moment is clinicians, and as you know, our brand is all about doctors. Um, they they really struggle. It's a struggle to get to the forefront of innovation and have their voice and their expertise and their input translated to something meaningful that's growth focused. Right, that was a long way of me saying it, but in short, TLDR, they feel left out. Um, and so I guess the question I have for you is, how do we help more clinicians, doctors who are joining these kind of events like health actually go from being the attendee and the observer to the one that's actually shaping and leading? So I appreciate, obviously, you go and speak to a number of different stakeholders every year to really kind of curate that event. But how do you actually get them involved in the conversation, especially those that aren't like the C-suite but aspiring to be? How do you identify those people, especially the ones that don't really fit into that category, the obvious category we know I'm talking about, and really get a bit more inclusive, like purposefully inclusive in that way, so that everyone has a little bit more of a kind of level chance of like getting their voice heard? Like, what would you, yeah, how do you do it, or what would you recommend to listeners who are like, hey, I want that? How do I do it, Henry?
So I think so there's two bits to it, right?
There's a
So
lot of that. Sorry, that's a bit of a long question, but there you go.
from our side and then from the clinician side. So from a
Mm.
health Europe side, the joy of having like an independent agenda and being able to talk about stuff is we can talk about a really like bafflingly broad range of things. So there are things for everyone. And that means we can have a very broad range of speakers and a very interesting type. So from my perspective, it's about visibility. So there's no one way to get your voice heard as anyone within the healthcare like community. There are loads. And so it's, from my perspective, it's about having the right people on stages. So lots of former clinicians who may now be social media influencers, they may be working in the C-suite, they've set up their own thing, or they are working more closely with startups, or they have a portfolio career. Having those people on stage who are doing things, that visibility piece is really important to us with our speakers just in general, because that gives people aspiration, the ability to look at someone and go, well, if they can do that, if they can pivot their career slightly to move away from pediatrics to doing online content about medical school or whatever it is, and then they can get on stage, like what's stopping me? And it's that visibility piece, that aspirational piece, that like, oh, this is doable. There are loads of routes to do this. And the more people we can get on stage who have moved from some kind of clinical pathway not clinical pathway, but clinical career pathway into a slightly different role within the ecosystem, the better. So there's a huge piece around visibility and getting the right people on stages who they're not there on stage to talk about themselves or, how their career has developed. We don't really do any content around that because it would be an unusual panel. But if you can understand a little bit about that person from when they're introduced and go, well, that's similar background to me. Why am I not doing this? Like, huge piece from my perspective. I think from a clinician perspective, not just from a doctor's perspective, but like we have nurses, every single type of HCP you can think of. There are a couple of ways of doing it. So many of the clinical entrepreneurs that you work with, that we know, that we have on stage or we sponsor and things like that, get huge amounts of value out of it. But there are also a number of clinicians on site. We partnered with Doctorpreneurs last year, and it tends to be the clinicians on site who are doing or interested in doing something outside of their clinical practice. So this year we've introduced provider rate tickets, which are our lowest ticket rate ever, to encourage providers to come. We're launching health.rad, which is our radiology event, which is really exciting, which is co-located with Health Europe and has CME accredited content and things. So we're hoping to incentivize more clinicians to be there. We still get a good number of clinicians, and they are, as you say, the people who are front and center of the deployment of innovation, and they should be front and center of the creation of it. So yeah, it's it's a visibility piece from my perspective. We need to inspire the next generation of clinicians and the current generation of clinicians to want to do things that get them up onto those stages.
What do you think is holding them back?
What to say, isn't it? Like, as with whenever anyone says like it's hard to innovate in the NHS, you go, well, the NHS is 1.5 million people. To say what's holding clinicians back when there are millions globally is really hard to generalize. I do think workload is a huge piece. Like, there are so many amazing clinicians who have incredible ideas, who just don't have the time to turn those ideas into a thing, whether that is some form of consultancy or a physical product or a SaaS product or anything like that. It is so hard to create when you also have a job saving lives or caring for patients. So I think there's a time aspect to it. I think there's also, traditionally, there's been a, to be careful with how I phrase this. I think traditionally there's been a, we know how to do this. We're in innovation, we're in transformation, we'll do that, and then we'll pass it down to you. And there might be one or two voices going up, going, this is what we want, this is what we need, and those, some of that feedback's taken. I think that traditional model is slowly dying off. And I think that there is hopefully more involvement. You'll know much better than I do. But it's going to be slow and it's going to be arduous. And I think the more transformational you can make the rooms that you curate, the faster that process becomes. But it is slow, and I imagine incredibly frustrating for clinicians to be like, having things top down handed to you is not, it's never the ideal way of innovation happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think, so I've been in the alternative career space for 11 years, and I've been through my own journey of really understanding how do we get more doctors developing careers beyond clinical, whether it's alongside clinical, portfolio career, or they jump in entirely, and mentor doctors across that whole spectrum. And I think one thing that's come, that I've realized, especially the way that we've shaped our program and what we do now, is that actually a lot of the things, and I think this goes for everyone, a lot of the things are internal, and things that the way we've been conditioned to think. And if we just forget what happens by the time you get into uni, for example, and you train, once we're trained to be a certain type of person, a certain system, we kind of generally stay there. And so looking at doctors, for example, doctors were meant to just be doctors, clinical, and that kind of ends there. Essentially, when you look at our training and how we've been conditioned, leadership, as far as clinical goes, that's how far as it goes. So when it comes to innovation, when it comes to stepping outside of that box, when it comes to real leadership in the face of uncertainty, in the face of risk taking, like that is just too much for a lot of people. And like there isn't enough belief to be like, oh, I can do that. Oh, that's valid. Like even we talked about doctors on social media, clinicians on social media, even that's still a bit of a battle. I was at Google speaking the other day, trying to say convince a lot of 200 doctors to be like, hey, just get your voice out there because your patients need to hear it because someone else is going to do it for you otherwise, right? And so it is like getting through that barrier of what they already believe, which is like the pull factors to like don't do things different, but also like the belief to like, yes, you can do it, and your voice and your position and your expertise is hugely like desperately needed. I mean, like, what am I seeing at the moment? One of the big reasons why I do what I do is I see on the industry side, there's so many companies who get investment, who are growing, who are doing really well without clinician input. But the problem is there's a lot of waste in there, especially at the early stages. So really great innovations are getting to market with clinicians, but there are a lot of them that don't get to market just because they don't really have that backing, that medically evidence-based backing. And so that is the big, maybe even a billion-dollar question, is how do we accelerate that process? And I definitely see how the platform that Health creates enables that. But I think it's a part of that puzzle in that sense. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, we'll never be the full solution to the puzzle, but I think we can be a big part of it by getting people in the room. We go back to what we talked about before. That interaction, that face-to-face piece is so important. And so if you can get these people into the room in front of the people who are decision makers, and I don't think it's that decision makers want to make decisions without clinical input. It's just that, again,
it's access on both sides, right?
Combination of access and like, process that we go through for it.
Yeah.
It might be that, not that these things have never been flagged with them, but that they're like, this is how I do things. And that when someone has one of those conversations, whether you're at Health Bite having a cocktail or a blini, sure where blinis came from, just quite hungry, whatever you Health Bite, or you're, you know, in a tailored one-to-one meeting, or you bump into them in a coffee queue, or you see them on stage, that human element, that interaction is so important. So I think there's also, as you say, there's a sort of ingrained thing within how clinical training works in terms of, you know, this is the role of the clinician. I do think that is changing. You only have to look at the vast, if you look at everyone who has doctor in their, not the doctors are the only type of clinician, but it's the easiest way of filtering this. Doctor in their title in the Health Europe speakers list. So it's like 400 plus. And then you look at their job titles, it's a fascinating mini snapshot of, it's much easier for me because I have them in an Excel sheet and you'll have to use the website, which doesn't allow filtering by title, but it's a really interesting snapshot of the different pathways that there are to get to a position where you're really influencing innovation, but you might still be clinically. So I'm always delighted to see that in the titles list and be like, okay, of these 400 plus speakers, here's all the people and here's all the different ways that they have found to influence how healthcare is delivered. It's a really nice bit of shorthand for like, okay, there's not just one route. You don't just have to go down the, I'm going into the innovation department of the hospital and help work on that kind of thing, or I'm going to go into VC. There are so many ways that people are doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, one thing that stood out to me in what you've said today in general, hierarchy. What role, especially, you know, coming from, I mean, traditional clinical hierarchy, particularly in the NHS, obviously we look at other healthcare providers, what role do you think hierarchy has when it comes to these two groups of people, C-suite, not C-suite, actually meeting, collaborating, innovating, moving forward? Because I mean, I'm speaking for myself and what I see, you know, like I've grown up in hierarchy since I was like born, basically, like that's what we're conditioned. And so the person who's got the authority, they have the authority, so they're going to know more than you do. But as I've gotten older myself and learned more about life, I realize actually that's not necessarily the case, because everyone has value, right? Some people may be in an area longer than the other. It doesn't mean they know more. It's just they've got different level of experience and expertise, but you always need a range, a diversity of experience to actually innovate. So yeah, so do you think that has a factor in this, so to speak?
I mean, it's more of a broader societal question, but from a...
Well, yeah, this is life.
I think hierarchies naturally exist, but I think the interesting thing there is around how ingrained your standards, your viewpoints become when you've been in a hierarchy or hierarchical system for a long time. You get to a point where you're like, this is how things work, this is just the way we've always done it. And so it's not that, you know, hierarchy is necessarily a great evil or anything like that. But what's really useful is having people who look at it, people like you who look at hierarchy and go, actually, no, I might not have done this for 30 years, but what I'm saying comes from frontline experience, or it comes from research that I've done. I have a valid viewpoint, and it's having the conviction, self-conviction, the conviction of your own beliefs, the sort of to go to people who have been doing it for a really, really long time and go, have you considered this? Why are we not looking at this problem from this angle? That's how change happens. That's
absolutely
outside of your comfort zone in the box and going, here's something that you may not have considered because you've been looking at the same things for...
Exactly, you're too close to the problem. Too close to the weeds. And as you said, like generational shifts happen, right? Cultural shifts happen. And as you said, there's so many different routes to a solution or to visibility or whatever. And you get blindsided in one way otherwise. So I think, I get really excited by that, actually.
I got a really good panel this year. We try and make sure all of our panels are really well balanced and varied. And we had, I think it was someone C-suite from a Dutch hospital. This is really bad, I can't remember, but very senior leaders from European organizations who sort of ignored the moderator and the other panelists for like 5 minutes, where they were like, hang on, how did you fix that? So you did, and they both had come across the same essentially workforce management problem, and had both fixed it in totally different ways. And there was this lovely moment of like, this is what we're talking about live. It's happening here. Like, you've approached this from a very systems point of view, and we're going to implement this SaaS tool, and we're going to do this. And you've approached it for a very human point of view, and this is what is improved by people feeling valued and things like that work. And that is a lovely, that's a lovely,
Beautiful.
well, because there's no one way to, what's it?
Yeah. I really love that example, actually. I really love that because it demonstrates the value of both technology, tech first approach, the people, human, cultural, and no one thing is the right way, but also it's the cultures that these companies grow in that then influences the decisions that are made and how to solve the problem. And it's all about value alignment, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I could talk about this forever, but mindful that we need to get into our last point, which is about, well, I guess it kind of ties into it, the future of leadership in health innovation. So if we look into the future with, as I said, the crystal ball of Harry, Henry. Sorry, I'm Harry, Henry, I guess it's, yeah, yeah. Anyway, crystal ball thinking about Prince Harry. Hey, what kind of leadership do you think that health innovation needs? As in, what kind of people, cultures, systems, will really drive that shift?
Well, I think if I was to try, if I had to find a word to distill all of the people who speak at Health Europe and our general attendees as well, and I had to give you one adjective, I think it would be open. I think, there are bigger, grander adjectives, and I could talk about transformation and all of these things, but I think open is the most important thing. And I think that for three reasons. I think firstly, open implies that you are open to being wrong. Like, oh, I'd never thought about something from that perspective. Maybe it's not wrong. Maybe it's just you're open to being challenged. I think open also means that you're open to new solutions. So you're not just head down focused on the problem in front of you, but you are able to do that, pull out, see the woods for the trees. And I think the third thing is that you're open to interaction. Again, it goes back to that human thing. You are open to meeting people who might not actually be the typical organization that you interact with, or might be the typical organization you interact with. You just somehow missed one another throughout the last however long. So I think open is the most important word when I think about the sort of leadership that health innovation needs. And that's on everyone within healthcare. It is very easy. We see it a lot with health tech companies. I often think about it from this perspective, right? Hundreds of health tech companies in the UK. We go back to that CCIO example, all trying to contact the same CCIO. All of those health tech companies, and I have done at some point a data build on every CCIO from every trust, every ICB. They've all done the same work. We're replicating work. The whole of Shoreditch is just a load of data analysts.
That and moustaches, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I have a West London moustache, so it's much more sort of.
Didn't know there was oh my God, that much of a nuance, but okay.
Well, one side is West, one side anyway.
Okay.
So we're constantly replicating work. Now, obviously, sharing all that data between them it would drive everyone mad, but people should be open more to collaboration. And I think the people we attract are the people who have got to a point of not frustration, but acceptance that openness and transparency and the ability to find new things in unexpected places, that sort of stepping outside of your comfort zone, the ability to see solutions that aren't the ones that are written down in the procurement document. That's what ties everyone at Health Europe together. There's that openness to interaction, that openness to new knowledge from different places. So I think when we talk about health innovation and the leadership, it has to be open. It has to be willing to try new things.
Absolutely. And, it's the willingness to try new things, but it's that openness to receive as well, and again, it just reminds me of some of the events that I've run and events that I've been to, and the best events have been whereby you can literally look a random person in the eye and start a really meaningful conversation with them without any judgment whatsoever. And like, for example, some of the events I've been to, it gets so overwhelming because of the volume of people you can do that with, that you just have to go and lie down. But it's because it's such a unique experience to be able to do that with so many people in the same room at the same time. It just completely changes the energy and vibe, and your nervous system is like, I don't recognize this. This is amazing, but I don't recognize this. It's just overwhelm. But you could just imagine the kind of magic and the innovation and like beautiful things that you've described like would happen all the time, and that would accelerate our healthcare massively if there were more of those experiences where people could bring their authentic selves, connect at that human level, and things happen, as you said, with that openness, the willingness to be challenged, to think differently, to act differently, to include new solutions. You know what I mean? Like, for example, we had our startup pitch competition where we had 3 women who are health tech founders pitching to doctors in our doctor's den a few weeks ago. Long story short, the woman who won, she'd been on this journey with her startup for like 10 years, right? Gone through so many obstacles. But the big challenge for her, I'll talk about her, Giovanna Forte, look her up, Giovanna Forte. But the thing about her is that she'd been on this journey for so long and she'd pitched to so many healthcare providers with some success, but it depends on the room and how open they are, right? And unfortunately, the rooms that she went into with clinicians, they were like, well, I get what you're doing. You've got a great innovation here, but it just costs more upfront than what it would cost in our surgery. So we're not going for it. She was like, well, what about the cost savings longer term? They're way better. And it was like, nah, move on. And like fear, challenge. We can't possibly do anything different than what's done in this procurement document. And it's those things that stop innovation getting to market. Because actually, I'm like, why is this not a normal thing day to day? Because it would say it was about peeing in a pot, basically. It was a really cool pot that just collects your MSU in 1p. Right. And it's like, God, why, someone who's been through 2 pregnancies and had to take my daughter to A&E to get her to pee in a pot. Do you know how hard that was? But do you know what I mean? It's things like that. Sorry, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I don't know too much about peeing in pots, but I do. I have done it.
Well done.
Out of medical necessity, just
for fun. We do that too.
But I think it touches on that point that we had earlier. Well, 2 things: openness, but also like the procurement thing. You talk about, this is the way we do it, but the way that stuff is procured, the way that stuff is purchased, is based on a set of parameters. And if you can have those early conversations, you can say, before you write that long document, and like I've been on the side of helping people write procurement documents, and get to the end of that cycle and you really just want to publish it, and it's just done. Like it's
just done. Yeah, it's just out there.
It's like it's one of the dullest parts of anything ever. And at least how my brain works, there'll be lots of people who are like, I love procurement. Good
for Henry, it's one of the dullest things. Not for everyone. There's just a disclaimer. Right.
If you like procurement. But from my perspective, people just want to get it out there and done. And so if you can say to someone, actually, like, you're thinking about this from this is the cost per unit or per patient or whatever it is. But actually, if you look in 2 years' time, if you price it that way, it costs the trust or the ICB or the hospital group or whoever it is 4 million more than if you look at it from this perspective. And the upfront cost is more. And then we look at how funding works in hospital systems and how governments allocate funding, and in the NHS, how ICBs pull things through. There are all these pieces that aren't fixable on like an individual level. But if we start the move towards being more open and everyone going, okay, well, look, we all know this is the best way of doing it. Let's challenge that assumption, and we can look at how we've got to that point of this is how we do it. That's how change happens. That's when an event like health is able to actually impact change, by getting all of those people in the same place to have a conversation naturally.
And how do you feel leadership needs to evolve, say in the future, in order for that to continually happen and get great results?
I knew the answer to that. I would be having this podcast discussion from a beach in Bermuda with millions of pounds in my But I think leadership is evolving. It might feel slow from the outside. I'm really privileged to speak to different leaders from across the ecosystem. I think there is a willingness now to be more open, to listen. It's slow, right? It's naturally slow. And innovation in the most risk-averse industry in the world is always going to feel painstakingly slow. We also have some of the smartest people in the world working in our industry. And those people's brains move at such a pace that it feels like innovation is slow, but we're always going to be naturally risk-averse. We deal with humans ultimately, and human bodies and minds. And so there's an element of risk aversion that's a good thing. But I think we have got to a point where, particularly in Europe, where public healthcare systems are so stretched and so sort of right at the edges of what they can possibly deal with in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, that innovation has to happen. It's no longer a, hey, this is nice to have. People have to be more open. They have to innovate. And that might not be the ideal pathway to have got there, but it is the pathway that we've got down. And so in the weirdest possible way, forced openness and forced like, okay, well, we have to do something, isn't the worst thing for leadership in terms of evolution.
No, I absolutely. I think, I mean, there is a lot of gold there, and it is about, I mean, 'cause you've talked about visibility, for example, being a key element of that. And I think I'd also, like we've discussed this as well, like for doctors who are listening, it is going back to your why, the problems that you want to solve, and that self-belief piece that you talked about quite a lot, Henry, in that actually your vision, like I just asked you about your vision, but there are a lot of people that have their own visions, right? And you have that vision for a reason, but it's not going to happen unless you actually go out there and seek to make it happen. And it is about having those conversations in the right rooms, at platforms like Health, and really believing in that. We talked about some of the world's the greatest, smartest minds. They're not necessarily like clever in the sense of academically. Actually, most of them aren't. But a lot of them are no, they're not, because a lot of them are dropouts, right? A lot of them are dropouts, are dyslexics, are neurodiverse, you know, all the things that, you know, historically they're like, well, you're not going to make yourself into anything, right? But these people, they adapted, but actually leveraged their strength and their skills. A lot of them is to do with people. A lot of them is to do with actually like having a vision and just getting people to back you and just seeing it actually happen. It's those kind of like, you know, we talk about softer skills, like leadership is a softer skill. It's a hard skill, as in like it's an essential skill, because as you said, like innovation has to happen. Healthcare is going to be paramount for the future. AI isn't gonna cut it, you know. It's like, well, it might cut it, but at the end of the day, it's like we're gonna still need humans regardless until humans are no longer existent. So I hear that. Anyway, I want to say thank you so much, Henry, for all of your insights. I think this is incredible because, you know, a lot of people, they show up at an event and they just don't really understand the care and the love and the amount of commitment and curation and everything you've had to do to actually enable them to move forward with their careers and their everything. And so it's just great to hear, even just, I know this is a slice of what happens. So I want to say thank you so much for sharing a part of that. And for clinicians and doctors or industry partners who are listening to this, what's the key take home that you want them to have, and how do they reach out to you if they're like, hey, I want that to hold hands with Henry Stoneley?
Put dry hands.
Moisturize them.
Honestly, the amount of money that E45 get from me. So my key takeaway would be, if you want to change things, you have to be in the right room and you have to be able to be open to new ways of doing things. That's, I suppose, the key takeaway for everything in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
The easiest way is henry@HLTH.com, or LinkedIn, or you can just sort of stand somewhere near Paddington, where our office is, and just shout my name until I turn up. Any of those work.
Has that ever worked? The standing next to Paddington and shouting?
I don't know. There's a lot of people outside Paddington Station shouting a lot of weird stuff, so I tend to just put my headphones in and trot past. But until someone tries it, I don't know. But I would like to think I'd be receptive.
If they do, please let me know.
I mean, I can stage it for you. We can have someone in the team do it, or Petunia, perhaps.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Henry.